Hey everyone, on the next episode of Noon, meet Dr. Macias, a seasoned physician whose love for the great outdoors isn't just a hobby, but an integral part of his extraordinary career. If you can't find Dr. Macias in the clinic, you're likely to discover him conquering mountain peaks. With many years of medical experience under his belt, he has seamlessly woven his love for the outdoors into a unique career. Currently, he teaches and practices with an emergency mountain medicine group, a team dedicated to rescuing individuals from mountainous terrains. Join us for an exhilarating conversation as Dr. Macias shares the story of how he merged his two passions. This episode promises a fascinating exploration of a career that bridges the worlds of medicine and mountain adventures. Don't miss the chance to uncover the peaks and valleys of Dr. Macias's remarkable journey. Let's get started. Hey, Daryl, thanks for joining us on the 911 Nonsense podcast. I appreciate you coming out today.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me and wrangling me in.
Yeah, no problem. I've always been kind of a big fan of yours, being an emergency room doctor that you were when we were working together. You were a crazy, super busy kind of guy, and I love the attitude that you had working in the ER.
All right, on. Thanks.
No problem. Can I go ahead and get an introduction?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Daryl Macias, and I'm an emergency physician, board certified, USDA grade A choice, and I've been doing emergency medicine for 29 years. And currently I'm at the University of New Mexico, but I also work at Mogul Medical, the Taos Ski Clinic. And a lot of my work too is currently with the UNM International Mountain Medicine Center. And what we do is all kinds of crazy things related to at a hospital, austere medicine, mostly medical rescues. Really what we've done. We teach people medical rescue, mountain medicine. I was the fellowship director for our wilderness, austere, and international emergency medicine fellowship. So what happens is after you finish a emergency medicine residency, 3 years, 4 years, then you can opt to do this extra, what we call a fellowship of 1 year in wilderness medicine. And I recently gave that position to somebody else because what I am doing is I'm trying to give out the opportunities that I've been able to create to other people, and I'm doing new things. So that's basically it. And I get to do really cool things in the IMMC is what we call it, such as I just recently returned from the country of Chile, and we're on a glacier. And what we do at UNM is we do a diploma of mountain medicine, and that's a certified worldwide course that has, how should I say, approval from several international organizing bodies throughout the world. The International Commission for Alpine Rescue, the International Society for Mountain Medicine, and the UIAA as well. So these are very important organizations. And what I did in Chile is I was actually a site evaluator for a brand new diploma mountain medicine course that they taught in Chile. And I'm still a little jet lag, not too bad, 4 hours, but I get to do that. And I get to send people to Nepal. I'm sending my fellow to Nepal next month. I'm actually the medical director for the Khumbu Climbing Center, which is in the Everest region. And we teach Sherpas medical skills and rescue skills. So yeah, a lot of things going on.
Holy smokes, that's really cool. Like really cool stuff. I guess that's not something that I've ever thought about is like who teaches the Sherpas to do what the Sherpas do, right?
Right. And they are legit. And our Sherpas have, summited Everest. They take people up Everest. They've had to do rescues. It's a legit full on thing going on. So yeah, we're really happy with it.
So how much medical training did they have before you guys went out there and you were teaching?
Well, the KCC Khumbu Climbing Center has been around since '03, and that's a story in and of itself that we might end up getting into later. But I didn't get involved till 2017. So they had various healthcare providers, physicians, and paramedics teaching this course when they could. It was catch as catch can. And since 2017, I've been involved constantly, or I should say, I'm having UNM out there because we teach in January, but I'm not going out every January. For instance, I'm going to stay home this year because I went to Chile for pretty, long time. So I send my fellows out there. I send wilderness medicine fellows from other programs out there as well. So it works out really good. But we have a presence. UNM has a presence in the Everest region.
That's really cool. And is it just the fellows? So is it just the doctors, or are there other people that are integrated into these programs as well?
Well, the way it works is, for instance, the last year, so I would go out there maybe with a fellow or a fellow and a resident. We haven't had any paramedics go out there from UNM, but we actually did have a medic from Nepal join us. So we've had, various people who've had wilderness first responder experience. Trying to think some of the other years that I did not go, they had some people, but it was mostly physician based.
Okay. And is that something that you would be opposed to, like maybe introducing more paramedics? I know that UNM used to have, I don't know if they do or not, they used to have a wilderness paramedic program. And again, I don't know if they still have that, but is that something that you would be open to inviting paramedics and more medical options?
It kind of depends because we usually, just because of space considerations for our host, we tend to limit it. We could definitely do that in the future. I actually haven't thought of that, but it is a possibility because I think a paramedic could do an excellent job. And we actually still have the Diploma of Mountain Medicine program for the paramedics, part of the IMMC. So we do teach that.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was still, and this was, I mean, back when I went to paramedic school 12 years ago.
12 years ago. Okay.
They had it back then.
And
Yeah.
11, and that's when we started our program. So yeah, you could have done it.
I went down different routes, but that's all right.
That's all right. It's all good. Yeah,
So you've gotten to see and do a lot of really crazy things.
I have. I have. Yeah. I mean, where do I begin? You know,
Working in the ER where we worked before is just one giant crazy thing, right?
it is. I mean, the emergency department in and of itself is definitely a very crazy thing. And when I went to medical school, I was told that, well, when you go to medical school, it's going to be like drinking out of a fire hydrant. There's just so much stuff going on. And I think in emergency medicine, the emergency department, it's that way now, especially post COVID. I feel that it's just gone pretty bonkers there, as you've seen before in your time there.
Oh, yes.
But I feel that it's not ceased, and I'm not sure why. There's so many possibilities, but I don't know why.
There are a lot of possibilities. I think short staff is a huge problem.
Mm.
And I think we just haven't been able to catch up since COVID. There have been high patient numbers and lower patient rooms because of lower staff capability within the ER.
Yeah, why do you think there's less staff? What's been your experience on that?
I during COVID there was a lot of free money, right? There were a lot of people getting paid to hang out at home. And I
Mm.
think that that opened a lot of doors to people saying, like, I don't like working, and if I can make it so that I can stay at home and hang out with my family and do the things that I actually want to do, I think that that left that door open for people.
Yeah, I think so too. And I also believe to some extent, at least what I've seen with the nurses, and I don't know with the paramedics, but I know with the nurses, they haven't felt as supported in a lot of these institutions, not necessarily local, but even on a wider level, because there would be these locums groups that would basically hire a travel nurse at 3 times the rate that you would normally get if you were just a staff nurse at a given institution. And I think a lot of the regular staff nurses didn't feel as supported as they could. So and now that, like you say, that free money has run out. So now that money isn't around. And what do you do? It's kind of crazy because you guys are really the engines. As doctors, we don't really do anything. We just type in orders. So I don't know what we do. Well,
That's
what do you
not
think?
true. I've seen you guys do some pretty crazy stuff in the trauma ER.
For sure, for sure, we love it.
So what got you into medicine in the first place?
Well, I have a storied life. I grew up in East LA, so I'm, Latino and Caucasian, so I have a nice mix there. But I also, my grandfather on my mother's side, he was a doctor in a mountain community in Southern California, and general practitioner. I loved what he did, and I was about 7 years old, and I said, I think I'm going to do this, and I think I'm going to do emergency medicine. I didn't know it didn't really exist. There was nothing like that. They had these old shows, paramedic shows, and stuff like that when I was a little kid. But I thought this is really cool, and he would let me help him put casts on people, develop X-rays, do urinalyses, and I thought this is way cool. And then I would go through high school knowing that I wanted to do it, and I was kind of a weird kid. I'd study anatomy and stuff in high school and learn first aid, and most people my age were doing other things, maybe things that they shouldn't be doing. But I also got into sports, and that was really cool. And then I went to college. I thought I'd pursue, and then I thought, well, I don't know if I want to do medicine. I was working in a laboratory, and I was working in a laboratory after I got out of college, and I took 2 years off. I would end up living in places like Yosemite, in California, and climb out there, live out of the car, be with my friends. I'd live in Joshua Tree. I was just a climbing bum for a couple years. I lived in Las Vegas. I actually became a salesman for a little bit of a time, and it was great because if the listeners know, there's a great place outside of Vegas called Red Rocks, and it's just a magnificent climbing area. And I just lived like a dirt bag. It was so awesome. And then I said, well, I got to do something, and I should pursue this dream of medical school, being a doctor. I can't just this has been my dream, my trajectory. Let's do it. I got into UCLA, and then I went to residency, EM residency here at UNM, and they haven't been able to get rid of me. So it's been great.
I'm sure they've been holding on real tight, Dr. Macias.
They've done it's been really fun. I mean, I have to say, I have to brag about my department. Just a wonderful bunch of people, everybody. It's been so supportive. The doctors, the nurses, the paramedics. I love this community. So yeah.
So when you went through medical school, did you plan on being somewhere like New Mexico, or did you have plans on being somewhere in like, Washington, Northern California?
Well, I kind of had this inkling that I wanted to go into academics. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to stay in Los Angeles or New York, so, Seattle, whatever, some big city. And I had some interviews. Usually, what we do is we go through this thing called a match process where we go to emergency departments and we just get interviewed. And I had a few interviews. I had, many in California, and I was very interested. They said, "Yeah, you're a great pick," and there was a lot of pressure for me to stay for various reasons in the Los Angeles area, and I had my family there. I came out to do an interview in New Mexico and it in Colorado at Denver, University of Colorado, and I first went to University of Colorado, and I was like, yeah, it's pretty intense. They weren't as respectful towards EMS providers as I would have liked to have seen because I've always had that connection with EMS even through med school. And then I came down here to New Mexico and it was totally laid back. I had some hippie attendings. This guy Dan Tanberg. There's this Dave Sklar guy. I mean, all these people. They're so laid back. And I thought, what's really cool is I don't have to drive 3 hours, maybe 60 miles, 3 hours to go climbing or something because it's right here at the end of the foothills. I can run, I can climb, I can do whatever. I really like the vibe and the laid backness. And that's what got me here, stuck me in the land of entrapment. And so I ended up here. This is my number one choice. So
No, that's fantastic. That's great. And you talked a little bit about how you got to help setting up the casts and doing the x-rays, like developing the x-ray films and stuff. Are you a little disappointed in the way medicine has progressed in that, like you said, doctors you do your assessments and you do your diagnoses, but you don't get to do a lot of like the treatment side of that.
Well, I will say that doing things like the electronic medical record is very time consuming, and I think it has made our interactions with patients a bit impersonal. I think the overflow situation and seeing patients in waiting rooms has certainly depersonalized things a bit. And then with, some of the violence that we deal with, that's tough. And just seeing people with, just globally kind of a lower morale than before the pandemic, that can be tough. As far as developing X-rays and things like that, I don't really need to do that. I feel that I am pretty hands-on. As an attending, I'm a little more hands-off because I get the residents and the interns to do my bidding. And if there's a med student, oh yeah, I got a great procedure for you. Just get that gloved, lubricated finger and do your thing, and it's all good. I don't have to do that. So I don't know.
Right.
I'm not too worried about it. And I get to do really cool procedures. Last year I took an ECMO course, which is really crazy. But I was telling one of our ED ICU attendings last night at the climbing gym, that's still one of the best courses I've ever taken. So yeah, it's wonderful.
Was it here? I've heard our ECMO course is really good here.
It was here. Yeah, it was here. And I've been able to cannulate a few people over the past year. So yeah, it's phenomenal.
I've also heard they have a mobile ECMO unit. Is that true? Do you know?
That's true. It's, not 100%, but they've been trying to initiate this out. In France, they did it. I want to say in Minnesota, there's an attempt to do that as well. And so our EMS consortium is very progressive and forward thinking. The last case, to my recollection, I've been gone a few months, but the last case didn't work out, but it was pretty amazing, logistically challenging to have cannulated this individual. So it's kind of tough in the street, but it's kind of this French EMS system that we're certainly employing in the Anglo-American EMS system.
Yeah, it seems like a really cool thing and has saved quite a few lives. What are the requirements for ECMO?
Oh boy. Well, you have to be a certain age. So the first thing is cardiac arrest. So if you've had a witness cardiac arrest less than 20 minutes, and I won't go through the whole thing, but, and I usually use a little cheat sheet as well, but that has to be in place that, you had a cardiac arrest less than 20 minutes. It's a resuscitatable rhythm. I mean, you can put somebody who's on asystole on it. There are certain conditions for that. There's, people who, wouldn't be probably appropriate for somebody with a traumatic injury, with a terminal disease, a terrible malignancy, or some other end organ disease that they otherwise probably wouldn't be salvageable. Those are the big considerations. And what I got interested in with regard to ECMO is for avalanche resuscitation, because I have been teaching avalanche resuscitation and have been involved with a international group called Mountain Safety Info. And we actually devised the first guidelines on, okay, you have an avalanche victim, you've unburied him, what do you do? Nobody's ever gone that further step. What do you do as far as medical care? And so we've been developing that. We've worked with the Silverton Avalanche School. But having said that, there are other things such as hypothermia, totally amenable to ECMO as well, with young patients, certain drug overdoses, things like that. So there's definitely ECMO is trying to find even more ways to be used. But believe me, it's not a cheap type of technology, but it is fascinating.
Not many of our treatments are very cheap anymore.
No, I have to agree with that.
No, that's really, really cool though. Are avalanches something that we have happen a lot here in New Mexico?
We've had a good amount. We've had most of it is in Taos. We just had a small slide in Santa Fe. Nobody was trapped, but we have had rescues. Now, speaking with the Albuquerque Mountain Rescue Council hat, I was the medical director for 17 years there. So we've had rescues off of the Nambe chutes for people who may have been either avalanched or hypothermic or lost. A lot of the avalanches that we get are actually in southern Colorado. northern New Mexico, southern Colorado, it's this horrible snowpack that has a propensity for these pretty significant avalanches. So I think with awareness and some of the things that we've been doing, hopefully there's less, but they're still there.
Yeah, that's crazy to think that New Mexico can have that amount of snow. And I think I think it's easy for people to just think we're so close to Mexico, we're warm all the time. And in Las Cruces, that may be true, but in the northern part of the state, we do actually catch quite a bit of snow.
Right, right. Redoso, I'm not too worried about the mountains around there. There is a potential, but certainly, is that where you are now, Las Cruces?
I was born and raised in Las Cruces. I'm in Albuquerque still.
Okay, you're still in Albuquerque. Okay, yeah, because you're talking
Hmm.
about Las Cruces chili and all that or food. So yeah, it's legit. But yeah,
Yeah,
it is
love
surprising.
the chili.
Yeah, right. I do too.
So you get to travel all over the world. What's your favorite kind of food?
Well, I mean, I really like to come home to the New Mexican food. I prefer it over the California or Tex-Mex type of Mexican food. Mexican food in Mexico is really good, and we don't really have a lot of that here. It's really good. I think that the Argentine food is really good, and then I'm partial to the Nepali food since I eat a lot of that. So those are my favorite foods: Indian, Nepali, South American, and Mexican.
That's awesome. Yeah, so in Las Cruces, I was just having this conversation the other day. In Las Cruces, it's more Mexican, and then as you move up in the state, like in Albuquerque, it's more New Mexican food. So I actually prefer to eat in Las Cruces.
Nice. Well, the Mexican food, it can throw you for a shock. There's this one Mexican type of food. It's this humongous chili. They stuff it full of meat. They have kind of this white sauce over it, and then they pepper this chili white sauce combination with pomegranate, and it's called chili en nogal. I've never seen it up here.
Hmm.
And then they have some strange tacos down there, really good tacos, tacos al pastor, etc., barbacoa. But they also have, you can get tacos with, cow eyeballs and things like that. It's just
Yeah,
crazy. Tongue,
cow tongue. Yep.
yeah, lengua.
Have you gotten to eat a lot of that stuff? Do you try it, or are you just like, nah?
Uh, yeah, I've tried it. It's not horrible. I tried brains once. It wasn't the most delicious thing I've ever eaten, but I kind of do this stuff
Like,
because
what kind of brains? What
uh,
what animal
scrambled
brains
for,
was that from?
oh, it was cow brains. It was cow brains. So when I was a kid,
Gross.
yeah, my grandpa was Mexican. My grandparents were Mexican, so they'd take me down to Tijuana, and I'd eat this strange stuff. I don't know what I was eating, but it was fun being down there as a kid.
It sounds like you enjoy traveling, which is really, really cool. I don't think I have to ask you what got you into mountain medicine. I think you kind of talked about that earlier when you talked about just loving hiking and doing all of that stuff.
Mm.
Would you say that the mountain rescue program in New Mexico is doing pretty good, or would you say that it needs a little more development?
No, actually, I think, for instance, I can speak of the AMRC and Cibola SAR Search and Rescue. I think they're two great programs. What we did is we at the IMMC we developed a program called the Reach and Treat Team, and it was predicated on going on the scene as doctors, which is unusual in EMS, except for like our EMS consortium. We send doctors all the time to the scene, and we have that same model where we will send doctors to a given rescue scene. Typically, with AMRC, you get called out, it's a bunch of people. It may not be medical. And what we've tried over the years is to kind of triage or canalize a medical need, a true medical need. So we could send our paramedic out, we could send our physician out to a given rescue scene. And over a few years, we've been working with the Bernalillo County Sheriff's department to develop a helicopter rescue type of situation. So, helicopter rescue is used in Europe quite a lot for search and rescue. We really haven't used it here. A lot of these rescue places in Europe, they also have people that do search and rescue as a profession, whereas here it's mostly volunteer. So we've gotten a hodgepodge, but I think through our EMS consortium, we've taken a lot of these search and rescue groups and we kind of have amalgamated them pretty well. Unfortunately, we had the helicopter crash with our main sheriff's office who passed away in that incident up in the fires up at where was it? Not Las Cruces. I want to say Las Vegas. Yeah, near Las Vegas. So we virtually lost the helicopter program. We're trying to reinitiate it, but for now, it's ground rescue again. And then we have, this is a difficult part, incursion by the Albuquerque Police Department and Bernalillo County Fire Department, as well as Albuquerque Fire Department. They too have gotten into the search and rescue mode. So there's a little multi tiered thing that happens where a lot of these pre hospital players can show up at a rescue, and it takes quite a lot of organization as far as the incident commander to figure out who's going out there, still run by the sheriff's department, but it's a little bit more unclean than maybe it could be. Let's just put it that way.
And do you think that these other rescue teams are getting trained sufficiently?
I think that AFD, AFR now, Albuquerque Fire Rescue, I think they're very well trained. I know the person who initiated that program. As far as the APD, I know one individual who was training them, and it seemed pretty legitimate. But one of the problems is just having too many players. It's like in street EMS, you have a three-tiered system. You've got the fire, you've got the police, you got the paramedics, and everybody's trying to decide what do you do, when, who, and taking command of a situation can be difficult. And when you have a lot of people in a search and rescue environment who are eager to do a rescue, it can be tricky, but I think that a lot of the players, for the most part, are technically competent. And I think with the UNM EMS consortium, there's a lot better control over these kind of disparate, different types of groups that want to engage in a rescue.
Sure, yeah. Too many chefs in the kitchen kind of thing, right?
Exactly. And everybody's just keyed up and amped up.
Yeah, I mean, they're stressful situations, and this is something they don't get to practice in real life very often, right?
That's exactly right. Now, having said that, I think that all these people, organizations, entities that I've named, I think they're very astute. They practice often. You have to practice a lot for these very rare situations.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. I'm going to go a little bit off topic here and talk about one of the things that I like to watch your posts from is Burning Man. It's something you participate in quite frequently, if I'm correct.
Oh, that's a crazy thing. Yeah.
And weren't you there this last year when they had all that crazy stuff going on?
Yeah, my wife and I were actually the camp lead. So for people who don't know about Burning Man, it is a the Burning Man people don't like to call it a music festival. I kind of understand why. It's how should I say it? It's like being on another planet. So a long time ago in the 90s, or I think it was the late 80s, this guy, Harvey, a few people decided to burn this effigy somewhere on Mickey's Beach, I believe, north of San Francisco. And the idea was kind of like Zozobra, although burn your past away. I think with these two individuals, it was forgetting about broken relationships. And it just started growing over the years. And it's become this festival where you're free to express yourself. You decommodify this whole space. So, what it is currently now is there's this desert north of Reno. It's called the Black Rock Desert. There's nobody on there. It's BLM slash Paiute Indian Reservation land. And every summer, end of August, beginning of September, you end up with 75,000 people on this dry lake bed. There's zero people, and then there's 75,000 people. They establish
Wow.
this thing called Black Rock City. And within Black Rock City, you have a bunch of these little camps. They call them theme camps. And theme camps might have something to do with, well, I want to do meditation class. There's a wild sex orgy camp. I mean, there's weird stuff. There's the drink booze class. There's all kinds of whatever ilk you're into. And the idea is for people to express themselves radically. And you can express yourselves by wearing funky costumes, or you don't have to wear anything at all. It's just whatever you want to do. And there's also a lot of great music. A lot of it is electronica music. I happen to like it, so I'm totally cool with that. People take mind altering substances, and the nice thing is when I first went out there, I was initially asked by a friend of mine in church. And, I happened to go to a
Oh.
local church here. Oh, this is so fun. Here I am at, New Life City, but we're a little crazy. We don't just go to church, sit in the pews. We actually like to get active with people. We like to love people because I think that a lot of churches really haven't done that as well as they could. And,
Hmm.
we believe that, hey, we want to be crazy like Jesus. He hung out with, people who drank a lot, with prostitutes. Why shouldn't we? Let's go for it. But my friend invites me in 2017. And, it's kind of like, I don't know, I'm an ER doctor, I don't do that kind of hanky panky. And then I thought about it. These are like my patients in the ED. And I'm like, yeah, let's go for it. And I go out there and I'm like, okay, it's a little weird. And I happen, it's very hot out there, and we're part of a camp. And I also actually volunteered. I went to the Rampart, which is the medical units they have out there. And I went out there and I thought, all right, this is kind of cool, but I've seen this stuff. Well, anyways, the guy who had invited me said, well, why don't you come to our camp? I hung out at the camp, and I realized, wow, this is really out of my comfort zone. There was this guy in the somewhere, it was like they have these blocks, and I was about a block away from this guy who was just blasting on this megaphone, get your effing coffee over here. And it was about 103 degrees, and I'm hot. I was in a trailer, but I was like, oh man, this guy's driving me nuts. It's 9 a.m. And I'm like, good night. I just want a little, like, a meditation time. I have to have that reset every morning. And then I thought, I'm just going to go find out what this guy's story is. And so I put on this big Arabic costume, I looked like a Saudi Arabian guy because, somebody from Saudi Arabia gave me this stuff. And I go out there and I see this guy, this poor guy. All he was wearing was boots and a pirate's hat. That's it. And he was totally clean shaven. And I'm like, okay. And, it ends up, the guy is gay. Cool, fine. And I go talk to him, and he said, "Well, what are you doing, brother?" He said, "Oh, I'm selling effing coffee, man. You want some?" And I said, "Well, I'm pretty jacked, but I want to bless you with something." And this is a weird thing. Some people won't understand it, but Burning Man is a very spiritual place, and I believe we get spiritual downloads. uh, for me, it's from who I call the Spirit of Truth. And it was weird. I was able to read into this guy's life before he even said anything. And I said, basically, you've been rejected by your dad. And I didn't know, this guy's lifestyle. I said, you've been rejected. People have minimized your importance in life, and you're looking for something. It was basically like that. And the guy drops the megaphone. He starts crying, and he just gives me this hug. And I just
Oh.
my arms around this guy, and I said, I am sorry. I want to give you the Father's love. And, it's Father God, but also me as a dad. I wanted to love this guy. And that really just opened my eyes, thinking people are hungry for spiritual truth. And now, having gone through the pandemic, people are so hungry. And so my wife and I this year, we were asked, why don't you lead this team? And we had a phenomenal team. And basically our team is, we call ourselves the Chai Lounge. We serve this crazy spiced tea. Some of it is this blue tea. People just line up to come to our tent. We give spiritual readings, and, we don't proselytize or anything like that, but we just love people. And it's blown me away. And like you said, Sam, during this rainstorm that we had, we ended up it's so funky. So before the rainstorm hit, we had a little bit of a heat wave, and I was talking to somebody and, just giving them a spiritual reading. That's what we call a spiritual reading. And then one of my teammates interrupts me and says, "You got to come out here. This guy collapsed, and he was on his bike, and he probably drank too much and had a little maybe heat exhaustion." And I go out there, and there's these two naked people surrounding him. And right in front of us in our camp, there's two gay camps, and they're just having this like a crawl, a naked pub crawl thing. And I was like, whoa. And I go to these two individuals hovering over this one collapsed guy. He's got a bloody face. And one guy's got, a cock ring on. This other lady, she's just letting it all hang out. I said, well, so what happened? And the guy says, well, I got this guy in C-spine control. I'm an emergency medicine physician. I was like, I mean, I didn't laugh, but I was like,
Yeah.
dude, if you showed up in my ED like this, yeah. All right. And the other lady is a pediatrician. So I had my friends help me bring the guy into the cool tent. I said, well, we'll take care of this. I mean, the whole thing about C-spine immobilization, that in itself is a little bit crazy. And the literature's coming out to say that you don't have to go so crazy. This guy's a young guy. And we just got him out of the bizarre thing. So that was kind of fun. And then a couple days later, the rainstorm and the wind and the mud hit, and we couldn't get around to any medical tents because everybody was unable to travel. When you have to actually walk to these medical tents, we actually had radios to where we could communicate with these guys, but we had two hypothermic individuals, one mild and one moderate, where they're just blah, 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 blah. And we had to
Wow.
improvise a warming technique for them. And then we housed probably about 15 other people into our camp. We had plenty of food, and yeah, it was really fun. And then these two hypothermic individuals did great the next day. It was really fun to see that. So, and the syncopal guy did fine too.
Oh, that's good. I mean, it sounds like you were managing almost an MCI, a mass casualty incident, or it definitely could have turned into that.
Right. It was actually an MCI of sorts. And people, we had one of those Starlinks so we could peruse the news. And it was funny what they were saying. Ebola has hit and it's a mass casualty. And people were actually very cooperative. I mean, the worst thing was the outside toilets didn't work. We had our own, but people weren't using the toilets. So they'd get pee bottles and all kinds of imaginative ways. And the toilets were probably out for a day. But people were really in good spirits. They had people splashing through the mud. It was fine.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, it definitely was blown up on the news. That's really the only thing I remember is that of how big of a deal they made it seem.
Right, right. But people had fun. And I think the whole thing, Sam, is whenever you're in some sort of a crisis moment, you have to laugh. And that's been what I've told is my strength is I make people laugh because if you do the other thing, you're just going to go berserk, right?
No, for sure. And as long as I've known you, which has been a long time now, since I've been in Albuquerque, you've always had and maintained a very positive attitude. How do you accomplish that with seeing some of the stuff and dealing with some of the stuff that we see?
Mm. Well, I think it, has to do with spirituality. I, personally believe there's life after death. I do believe in a personal God. I believe in Jesus. And I've seen some crazy things. About, I want to say 12 years ago, I was actually getting a little burnout on my career because I would see the typical patient who came in every night drunk, or you guys would carry this person in, on a stretcher. And I'm like, this stuff isn't going to get any better. Heroin, I mean, all this stuff. Now it's fentanyl. And I thought, what am I really doing here? Nobody's getting better. 10% of the people will heal on their own. Probably 10 to 20% will benefit from the things that we do. Maybe a little more. I don't know. But the majority of people, there's just this recidivism, and there's all kinds of reasons why people aren't getting better. And I was thinking, this medical thing, this just isn't doing it. And actually, my spiritual trajectory was interesting too, because I was in a very conservative, stifling church, I will say. And my wife and I were just like, oh, this is crazy. And then I started finding out about the supernatural experiences of, heaven or eternity. And I started doing crazy studies into this. I would study quantum physics. I've always been this science nerd, but I thought, all right, this supernatural stuff is totally, it can totally exist because I know about quantum physics and I know about just weird things that blow your mind. And when people look at weird stuff like quantum physics, they say, yeah, this stuff, this angel stuff, it could totally exist. And so I thought, all right, I believe in this book called the Bible, but I'm not seeing people live it out. So let's just try it out. And then my wife is French, so we would go to this sister church in Geneva, very conservative, except that the people were leading it. They were just like on fire talking about strange things. And I thought, all right, what are you talking about? Oh, there's supernatural healing. That's just nuts. That's crazy. And I'm a cynic and I have to see the studies. So I was looking at this stuff and I thought, well, let's just give it a try. It says in the book of Acts that these guys did crazy works. Let's see what happens. And so when we got to this church one day, one of the friends I have over there in Geneva, he has this paresis. I can't remember if it was on the left side of his face, but basically he had this inoperable brain tumor in the brainstem. I'm like, crap, here it is again, another incurable disease. Medicine sucks. And then I had this weird thing. I don't know what it was, but it was, or he was telling me, just pray over this guy. I'm like, this is weird. Just put my hands on this guy's ear and pray over it. And I said, all right, can I pray over you, Richard? He says, yeah, sure. Yeah, it's going to help. And I was like, yeah, it's going to help. I pray over. There was no be healed, none of that kind of stuff. It was just nothing happened. There was no fireworks, no funny feeling in my hand. And I kind of said, I hope you're okay. That felt weird. And, this guy said, yeah, it was weird, but thanks. And then my wife challenges me a week later and she says, call Richard, see if there's been any change. I'm like, oh, come on. This stuff's silly. But I call him and he said, well, I'm not walking funny. He was pretty ataxic. He says, I have sensation and movement in my face. I'm like, ooh, that's weird. And then the guy says, next week, I'm going to have a PET scan and MRI in Paris. I'll call you next week, see what happens. Then he calls me the next week and he says, you're not going to believe it, but the doctors cannot find this brain tumor anymore. And I'm like, what? This is crazy. And honestly, I the doctor actually said that it was a miracle. And this is totally weird stuff, and some of the listeners won't accept it, and that's totally cool. But I've seen some pretty weird stuff even after. And so I don't want to limit my experience to what I sense. And I'm very cognizant of the literature. And I've looked at the medical literature to see if there's such thing as supernatural healings. And there are some documented cases. A lot of it's fake. I don't like the fake stuff. I'm not afraid to try it out, but I'm very careful and very respectful of people and their views, their beliefs. But people do welcome the love, and I think a lot of times is it what do you call it, placebo effect? It could be. I can't explain it. I'm not here to explain it. There's a lot of things in medicine that we can't explain. I'm just here to say, hey, there is hope, and with the hope that I have, I tend to understand things that are a little what seems to be unfair in our human understanding. And I try to teach people that, things aren't always easy, but there is a greater being. If you're Christian or Buddhist or whatever, I worked with a lot of Buddhists, obviously, whatever it is, just to have a spiritual lifestyle because there's more to this life than what we see. And I think that's carried me pretty far into this echelon. And so, yeah, I don't know what it is, but that's it.
That's no, that's amazing.
Yeah, and just be kind to people. Don't be an idiot. Don't be a jerk.
Yes, very, very true. So you keep talking about all this crazy stuff that you've seen. What would you say has been the craziest thing you've ever seen?
Well, I mean, the healing was pretty crazy, and one time at Burning Man, we have this thing called a drum circle, and a drum circle is basically just this native drum beat, and people go around. And I've seen people writhe around this one guy, this Hindu guy, just started squirming like a snake and started hissing. And it was weird. And, people may say it was an exorcism. I don't know. Nobody touched this guy, it just like happened. And he was like, whoa, I feel so much better. you know? And I've seen some pretty hard things. One of the things that's probably the weirdest that got me into this mountain medicine thing was when I was climbing. I had people that I would train to climb, friends. Hey, I want to go climbing with you. Let's go on an expedition. This one guy in particular, he became my best friend, and he would end up going further in the climbing world than I would because I also was a doctor. And he got invited by these very well known climbers, and they went on an expedition to this mountain in Tibet called Shishapangma. It's one of the 14 over 26,000-foot mountains, and he died in an avalanche. And this was in 1999. So I had my best friend die in an avalanche with this other guy. Wow, it was just crazy. And I thought, this really sucks, obviously, but I think there are moments in destiny that propel you in life where you think you couldn't have done otherwise. And so what happens, and this is craziness, is that he was buried with this other friend of his under about 50 feet of avalanche debris and ice off this 26,000-foot mountain. And we thought, well, we're never going to see this guy again. And his name, my friend, is Dave Bridges, and he got buried with another very well-known legendary climber, Alex Lowe. So the other people that were on this expedition survived, one of which is Conrad Anker. And I got to know Conrad through this horrible incident because we both lost our best friends. And then I would get a call in 2016 after, well, let me back up. So the idea of mountain medicine was born out of the desire to help people avoid avalanches. That's all it was. And one of my co EM residents, Linda Lynch, decided, hey, we ought to start a wilderness medicine rotation for the medical students here. And I said, that's a great idea. And a lot of it was based on safety, avalanche safety, traveling in the mountains, rescue, things like that. And it became its own beast, I should say. And it would flourish into maybe the first year 7 students, to where the third year I had 26 students. I had people coming from England, from Australia, from India. I mean, and I didn't do anything. I don't promote myself. It's really actually quite hard to even talk about some of these things because I don't like to talk about myself. I like to talk about you. It's the you club. But at any rate, this developed into that. And then I would aggregate a few more faculty members, and one of which we had this dream of doing international courses. I went to international medicine. I ended up working with SAMU in Paris. All this stuff happened. And we developed this International Mountain Medicine Center, in short. And then in 2016, after a trip I had taken with our group of residents and medical students, we just got back from Hawaii. We did this week in Hawaii, teach diving medicine. And I get this call from this guy, Conrad Anker, and he said, you're not going to believe it, but, with regard to the global warming, there was a party in this same mountain, Shishapangma, that found our friends. They basically came up from out of the glacier, and their bodies were up there. And Conrad says, I want you to be the medical doctor, and we got to go unbury our friends and give them a proper burial. So I ended up on the plane to China very soon after, and I had to help all these other people acclimatize. And we basically found our friends on this mountain, and we gave them a great Buddhist burial, and that was pretty weird. But the other thing was that Conrad, he had started this organization in memory of his friend Alex, who had died, and I had probably started this mountain medicine program in honor of my friend Dave, and they both died together. And it would end up that I didn't know about his Kumbu climbing center, and he said, would you come and be the doctor? And I said, sure. And I loved it. And so this destiny and putting us together, me and Conrad and all these other people, these great Sherpas and all this stuff, it's worked out. So it was like there's a really bad situation, but somehow there is some redeeming value to it. So that's pretty crazy. And I hope it wasn't too much info. TMI.
No, no, that's amazing. What a great story. And what a great, uh, I guess it would be a relief, at least I would hope a relief for you being able to go and be one of the people that helped, remove the body and then give him a proper send off.
Yeah, it was great. It was good. I mean, it was hard. It's hard looking at
Yeah.
a friend in the face who's been dead for 16, 17 years. That was rough. That was rough. But yeah, we made good out of it.
Yeah, I imagine. I imagine that would have been very rough for anybody in that situation. And that's amazing that you were able to go and do that for your friend.
Yeah, it was cool.
And then to see the two of you guys collaborating too in the end, making those two programs come together and being able to progress those, that is what a just like you said, it's a bad situation, but it's come into fruition in this really cool way, which is really neat. The collaboration.
Yeah, it's you can't make this stuff up just anywhere. It's just amazing. And you know, personally believe, some people may not believe, but I think there was a supernatural hand in all this because none of this stuff should have happened. And we wonder, why do people die? And it's, very strange. And there doesn't seem to be any redemption in the idea of death or sickness, but there actually can be, but we just don't understand it yet. But it's deep spiritual stuff. That would be another podcast. That's way too heavy, but
I agree. That's just one of those things like that a lot of people don't believe because they can't see, but I can feel a lot of these things. And you talked a little bit about quantum physics and stuff. And my wife, she is very much a nerd and she would have a blast talking to you about all this kind of stuff.
oh, nice, nice. Right on.
Are there any articles or any types of materials that you would suggest people go and read if that's something that they're interested in reading?
Well, there's been some studies, and I think it had to do with people who pray. And I don't remember a lot of the studies just off the top. I can't quote anybody, but there's a study in a pretty legit journal that demonstrated that people who pray or who sing praises or whatever, they tend to have an increase of lifespan of about 7 years, and they tend to be a little more hopeful and whatnot. And there's actually a fellow that I got to know a little bit through this one group called Global Awakening, based out in Pennsylvania, who is a doctor, and he investigates a lot of these things to see if these so-called miracles or miraculous healings are really legit or not. And you have to have evidence, written evidence, before and after. And he's in the process of kind of getting all this stuff together to show that, these are medical healings, if you will. And again, I can't explain it. Is it a placebo effect? But when you see people cured of cancer, or this guy, in my case, cured of this brainstem tumor, I can't explain it. And, probably a lot of my colleagues will think, this dude is really whacked out, but that's okay. I'll take it, because if somebody gets better, why not? And if it doesn't work, I don't worry about that either. But we have so much, I think, at our disposal, more than we think we have, even as medical professionals. And it's hard to do a double blinded, randomized prospective study on a lot of this stuff, but some people are actually starting to do this. So,
Yeah, no, that's really, really cool stuff. What is your opinion on like psychedelics and other substances? Do you think that there's a link there, or do you think it's complete BS?
no, I don't. So, I will say I'm one of the kings of ketamine, using ketamine regularly for a lot of issues, one of which is chronic pain and depression and suicidality. And unfortunately, our IRB has failed to pass the two efforts we tried to study ketamine for acute depression in the emergency department. But I think ketamine is really interesting in that it rewires neurons and neuronal paths that otherwise would have developed as a consequence of PTSD, let's say. And so ketamine can rewire people. I think things like mushrooms may have a possibility as well. I'm open to it. I've tried it once when I was climbing in Yosemite. It didn't do anything. It just made El Capitan kind of grow and shrink in size, but it didn't do anything. But you know, I haven't done anything. I haven't done anything lately, and that's for the medical board to know. So hey, you guys get off my case. As far as other things like MDMA, I've actually looked at a lot of this stuff. It is pretty interesting. I think that stuff is still in its infancy, and I'd be very careful with that. LSD, I don't really have an opinion one way or another, but it is possible that some of these psychedelics open the mind, and whether it's a chemical or a spiritual thing, or it's actually a combination of both, I don't really know. But I think it should be studied.
Yeah, I think that microdosing is kind of a way to go right now. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in some of the more open states like Colorado. And I have good hopes for it.
I agree. Ketamine's great. I think there's a role for microdosing. Hopefully more studies will be forthcoming. The FDA is a little tight-fisted on a lot of that stuff, but that comes from probably the old 1960s or 70s or war on drugs or whatever. And
Yep.
yeah, I
The Reagans. Yep.
yeah, you just have to be careful with it. And, even ketamine people can get in a bad trip. And what I try to do is I try to guide people if I can and turn off the lights if it's possible, maybe have some nice music. Because the whole idea is they can either have a good trip or a real bad trip. And so,
Yeah. They do ketamine therapy for people with PTSD. I couldn't tell you where they do it. I know they had tried opening a clinic here. I don't think it opened. It may have. But I just think I've heard people talk about it and I've heard their stories and I've heard really good results out of it. And I wish that we would be more open to it in general as a society, I guess.
right, I think that it's opening up. I think there's a ketamine clinic in Santa Fe, and they actually wanted to hire me. There's a let's see, I guess it would be a methadone clinic here locally that was interested in my
Mm-hmm.
experience with ketamine. Would I be interested? And I've cut down on my clinical work at UNM, semi-retired, but I'm still working, so it's kind of weird because I can do this other crazy stuff. And I'd be open to that. I'm investigating that opportunity, but I think it'd be really good. One of the things is the old medical establishment is afraid of this stuff, and we can't be sure why. It's, for instance, the whole marijuana, the CBD thing has been, when I was growing up, oh, it's a terrible thing, and now there's places in Colorado, here, Oregon, people are doing it. It might be a bit too much. You can see some people who maybe do not do well with CBD. That does happen, but it does have some interesting effects that we don't quite understand. And so, you've got some of the medical establishment that's still wary of this stuff, and it's going to take some time and convincing. It may have a role, it may not. I don't know, but let's see.
Yeah, no, it's true. I agree. So I just want to open the floor for you and give you the opportunity to talk about anything that you may have wanted to talk about coming in today.
Jeez. Well, that put you on the spot. Well, I think I talked a lot about
I
a lot of
know.
this stuff, right? I think it's great. I just feel very pleased that, yeah, I think New Mexico is a great place to do a lot of very out of the box things. I like to be out of the box. I like to encourage other people to be out of the box. And if anybody is interested, yes, I will promote I wouldn't call it my podcast. I'd call it the Wilderness Medical Society podcast. It's called Wilderness Medicine Podcast, just plain old podcast. And we try to have interesting people. I don't publish as often as you, Sam. It's every quarter, but we try to get some interesting movers and shakers in mountain, wilderness medicine, austere medicine, some pre hospital medicine to talk. We discuss articles and we just have fun talking to people who are doing really crazy stuff in the wilderness medicine domain. I think you have to be somewhat specific in some of your, not you, but just people in general, a podcast, stay on a given topic. If you're Joe Rogan, you can talk about anything and all that kind of stuff. But like you're talking about EMS and crazy stuff with EMS, and you're having a lot of fun. And I think that's really cool. What you're doing is you just want to have fun with people and have them chill. And sometimes you get into too much academic stuff and it becomes really boring. And I try to mix a little academia with a little fun as well in our podcast. So if people are interested in that, great. If not, that's totally cool. But uh, can I say I've talked a lot about myself and I usually don't. So
That's what it's all about. I try to open up this episode's about you specifically.
it's not the me show. I want it to be the you show. If I can help with your podcast, with people listening, if I'm, somebody who's interesting enough, I'm so happy about that. And I just love to give people the opportunity to somehow express themselves, find their way in life, give a mentorship, because my whole thing is facilitating other people so that they can become great people. I think there's too much in this society and life that says you're not good enough, you're not worthy enough. And I'm thinking that's a bunch of baloney. Forget it. I think we were created to be great people, to help one another. That isn't really part of our society now. Our society's even become kind of split. Well, you believe this and we believe that. And we're not moving, and people don't talk to each other. It's just a tragedy. So my impetus is, yeah, try to get people together. Let's talk.
Yeah,
No,
integrate more.
right, right. We're not enemies. We don't have to be enemies, but
Exactly.
yeah.
I have one more question for you. So you talked a lot about spirituality and feeling very spiritual. Do you believe in ghosts?
Wow. That's kind of like among the topics like UFOs. I have personal beliefs about that. I don't think grandma is around as a ghost. I will say that I think there are spiritual beings, some benevolent, some malevolent, that are probably representation of those ghosts. And what I've seen with Burning Man and other things is, with New Age practices, I've seen some pretty weird stuff. And for instance, some people might believe in a spiritual guide, for instance. And I've seen some of those people follow these spiritual guides, and it hasn't really been for good. So you can call these people ghosts, phantasms, whatnot. I've a couple times had some pretty weird, trippy experiences. I've seen some weird things that in the physical realm would not necessarily be able to be recorded. And I wasn't on DMT or MDMA, I promise, no shrooms. So I've had glimpses of that. I've felt some weird things. So I think there are spiritual beings out there. I think that if you go back to quantum physics, there are what seems to be maybe 11 types of dimensions. We have four dimensions. We have depth, which is a third dimension. Then we have time, which is the fourth dimension, and we don't quite understand time. Beyond that, there are some dimensions that we can't prove: gravity, strong forces, weak forces. You can get into all that kind of stuff. But within that, I think that there could be spiritual beings that could exist. It may sound a little weird to people, and I understand that. I'm a bit of a skeptic on that, but I've experienced some stuff that I can't explain. So there could be that. I'm not sure if it's, your grandma or anything like that, but people get into tarot, and I've seen some weird stuff with tarot and Ouija boards and stuff like that that are really weird. That's all I gotta say.
Oh, that's really cool. It's a great explanation. And Daryl, I really want to say thank you for coming out and joining us today on the Noon podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure, and it's been great catching up with you.
Well, thanks, Sam, for having me. And I know I've been hard to nail down, but yeah, that's me. I'm like those ghosts. Here,
That's
one
all
minute,
right.
gone the
That's all
next.
right.
No, thank
I'll
you
take
very much.
whatever you're willing to give. Yeah, no problem. I hope you have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
Thank you for listening. Before we wrap up, we have a few important announcements to share with you. Firstly, we're excited to announce the launch of our brand new 911 Nonsense Facebook group page. It's a community where everyone can go to connect, share ideas, discuss topics from the show, and get all of the most recent updates about the podcast. We'd love to have you join us and be part of the conversation. Next, we want to ask you to rate and review our podcast on your preferred platform. Your feedback means the world to us and helps us reach a wider audience. By rating and reviewing the show, you'll be supporting us in a big way and helping others discover 911 Nonsense. If you enjoy what we do and would like to support the podcast even further, we have a few options available. You can visit samspursuit.com to find the links to our 911 Nonsense merch page and our recently released Noon gear page. Every contribution, no matter the size, goes a long way in helping us continue to better the podcast. We know that not everyone is comfortable being on the podcast, but we still want to hear your stories and experiences. If you have a compelling story and would like to share it to be read by me in a future episode, please reach out to us via email at 911nonsense@gmail.com or through our website's contact section. If you choose to be anonymous, we'll make sure to respect your privacy while sharing your story in a way that resonates with our audience. Thank you again for tuning in. We truly appreciate your support and look forward to bringing you more engaging content in the future. See you next week.